Welcome to another Explainer. Today, we're diving into a topic that's absolutely essential for literally anyone who steps foot in a classroom: the improvisation of instructional materials. Whether you're a veteran educator with decades under your belt or you're just starting out, this is all about empowering you. We want to turn everyday limitations into extraordinary learning opportunities. Because, it's not just about making do, it's really about taking total control of your teaching environment.
So I want you to start by thinking back for a second. Think of a specific lesson you've taught, or hey, maybe one you've observed, where the teacher simply did not have the required teaching materials. What was missing? And what alternative did you or the teacher actually end up using? But here's the real kicker. Was that alternative lesson still actually effective? It's a situation almost every single educator has faced at some point, right?
Okay, let's dive right into this. Today we're exploring 5 key areas: the missing material dilemma, defining true improvisation, the 4 types of improvisation, ensuring quality and safety, and finally, a fundamental educator mindset shift.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the missing material dilemma.
Look, the reality is that sometimes instructional materials are just entirely unavailable. Maybe it's a tight budget, or the costs are just downright exorbitant. So when your ideal, glossy, commercially produced materials are missing in action, how do you pivot without losing the lesson's impact? The answer definitely isn't to just skip the lesson, and please don't just default to a dry lecture. The real answer lies in how we purposefully explore our alternatives.
Moving right along to Section 2, defining true improvisation.
There's this super common myth out there that improvisation is just, making do for poorly funded schools, or that improvised materials are somehow inherently inferior. Well, we need to bust that myth right now. Improvisation is actually a highly professional pedagogical skill. Academically speaking, it's the creative use of available resources to achieve a desired objective when the ideal resources are unavailable. It is totally intentional, not accidental.
True improvisation is creative and flexible, but it's also entirely practical. It's resourceful, but above all else, it's purposeful. You aren't just grabbing what's in the recycling bin and crossing your fingers. Good improvisation is always accurate, it's always safe, and it's always learner-centered.
That brings us to Section 3, the 4 types of improvisation.
Understanding the actual mechanics here is absolutely crucial. There are 4 common frameworks teachers can pull from their toolkit: substitution, modification, construction, and adaptation. And your choice here depends entirely on what your lesson objectives are and what your specific learners need.
Now, what's really interesting about this breakdown is the core idea behind each type. Substitution is simply replacing an unavailable item with an equivalent material. Easy enough, right? Then you have modification, which means improving an existing material just to make it work better for you. Construction, which is also known as creative improvisation, is when you're building something brand new right from scratch. And finally, adaptation involves tweaking a material so it perfectly fits your specific local context.
Let's zoom in on how modification works in practice. Imagine a teacher takes an original material, say a really small printed map, and modifies it by blowing it up, enlarging it for a massive class. The direct result of this physical change? Drastically improved learner understanding. That modification effectively bridges the gap between what the material originally was and what the learners actually need in that moment.
To really bring this theory to life, let's look at some fantastic real-world classroom examples. Using bottle tops for counting and arithmetic? That's a perfect example of substitution. Or how about creating a paper keyboard to help learners identify keys before they ever even touch a real computer? That is absolutely brilliant construction. Seriously, it's incredibly ingenious. And using local, everyday materials to demonstrate complex science concepts often makes the learning far more meaningful. Why? Because learners understand concepts so much better when they can use objects they're already familiar with. Familiarity basically breeds comprehension.
All right, let's pivot to Section 4, ensuring quality and safety.
So we've talked a lot about creating these materials, but now we actually have to evaluate them. And I have to ask you a pretty blunt question. Is your improvised material actually good? Look, just because you spent 3 hours building a clay relief map on your weekend does not automatically mean it qualifies as effective instructional design. We have to evaluate our creations rigorously.
Before using any improvised material, you really need to put it through a rigorous checklist. Ask yourself about its accuracy and relevance first. Does it represent the concept correctly and actually support the lesson objective? Then, think about the pure logistics. Is it safe? Is it visible to everyone in the back row? Is it durable enough that you can use it again next year? And, crucially, inclusiveness. Can learners with diverse needs actually use it? Honestly, an excellent material absolutely must answer yes to all these questions. To simplify that even further, just try to remember this crucial rule of 3. Every single material should be accurate, it should be clearly labeled, and it absolutely must be tested before you ever bring it into the classroom. If a poorly designed, improvised material ends up confusing your learners, oversimplifying complex concepts, or worse, providing incorrect information, you aren't just standing still, you are actually moving backward. Which means we really have to be fiercely vigilant about common mistakes. I kind of want to sound a warning bell here. Never, ever compromise student safety or provide incorrect information. But you know what the absolute biggest mistake you can make is? It's starting your planning by looking at what random materials you have sitting in the supply closet, rather than looking at your actual lesson objectives. Other major pitfalls to watch out for include producing inaccurate models, using unsafe materials, overcrowding your visual charts with way too much text, ignoring learners with disabilities, and, like we just said, failing to test the material first.
And that leads us to our final part, Section 5, the educator mindset shift.
So the crucial point here is that escaping those pitfalls requires a total paradigm shift in how you approach lesson planning. We basically have to stop asking the wrong question, which is, what materials do I have? Instead, we need to start thinking like true instructional designers and ask the right questions. What should the learners understand? And only after that, how can I represent that idea using the resources I actually have available?
This creates a highly logical, step-by-step progression. First comes instructional design, identifying the core goal of what needs to be taught. Second is the improvisation, creating the specific, tailored tool to teach it. And third, well, that leads to successful learning. Notice how the instructional design always dictates the improvisation, never the other way around.
Which leaves us with this really powerful formula. Creativity plus purpose plus appropriate resources equals effective teaching. When you truly apply this, you're going to realize something profound. Improvisation is not some limitation imposed on you by a lack of funding. It is an unparalleled opportunity to totally transform your teaching, to make it more contextualized, far more practical, and infinitely more engaging. So the very next time you find yourself missing that quote-unquote perfect material, challenge yourself. Are you just making do, or are you ready to use your creativity to build a bridge to authentic learning?